Hi guys, welcome to our second session on aggregate planning, which is just following actually the literature, the introduction and the theoretical part of aggregate planning. In the previous video, we just talked about we talked about what was aggregate planning, what were the different reasons of uh, using aggregate planning, why it's sometimes called sales and operations. We also talk about the different strategies that you use. We use the normal strategies and the pure strategies. How can company manage the demand and the supply? So all of those few things, we talk about them in the previous video. And as far as this part is concerned, before watching this video, I will ask you to go back to that video for you just to have an idea of what we are calculating and what is the meaning of everything that we are doing so far. So in this video, this is going to be the first session of calculation, so that we're going to be able to be on the same level and to know how aggregate planning is applied practically in organization. So one of the example that we did recently, not in the video but in the live session, was about this company that is manufacturing skateboard, and then they have different forecasts that have been working on. They got forecast for the first, the second, the third until the sixth period. These are the number of skateboard that they forecasted, and then they are using a level strategy which says that we are producing everything. We are producing the number of units that is equal no matter the period. So in period 1 we produce 400, period 2, not 400. Based on this exercise that we're talking about 300, which is the level output. And based on what we calculated, we say that this was the forecast, this was the regular output, and then we calculate all these things. The policy or the company was that they are not using overtime nor subcontracting, and then we went through that. So today what we are going to do is we are going to do is another exercise that is actually deriving from that exercise, because this is the exercise that I was talking about that we did. So this other exercise is still a continuation of the previous example, but now we're going just to try to make it more understandable again. So as a reminder, let me read the first question. It's saying that the planners for a company that makes several model of skateboard are about to prepare the aggregate plan that will cover 6 periods. So it's from period 1 to period 6. This is the forecast. When you look at the general steps of aggregate planning, they're always, the first step is to make sure that we check our forecast and that our forecast is accurate. This is the forecast. They give us the different costs. If you remember, they were also talking about in the theory, we also talk about the input. We say that for you to calculate the aggregate planning, one of the major input is the cost, and also is to know the different policies that an organization is having. Generally, by policies, we're talking about, are they working on a regular time basis? Are they following a chase or a level strategy? Chase strategy, we accommodate our supply to match the demand, but our level strategy is like the supply is still the same even though the demand is changing. So in this case, they say that if a company works on a regular time, they are paying the employees 2 rand per every skateboard that is manufactured. For overtime, if they work more than what they're supposed to work, we're gonna pay them 3 rand for every skateboard. Normally we pay them 2 rand, but because it is overtime, we are paying them 3 rand. Subcontract is if we don't want our employees to do it because we have different workload, we can give it to other employees or to other organizations that will subcontract for us. We will pay them even more, which is 6 rand. Then for every product that is our inventory, we are going to pay 1 rand. Then the bulk orders, those are the product that a customer asks, but we don't have them in stock. So in that case, we are going to provide them later. And in that case, we pay even more, which is 5 rand. So they say that the company now evaluates that the cost for a steady rate regular time output, mainly using the inventory to absorb an uneven demand. Sometimes the company is allowing to use backlog, which are referred to back orders. So overtime and subcontract are not used because they want a steady output. So they intend to start with zero, like an on-end inventory, and prepare an aggregate plan and determine the cost. So assume that the level rate is 300, which is actually the regular output. This is what the company produces every time. It's 300 per period. With a regular time, it's more like we take 300 times 6, we'll get 1.6. 1.8 divided by 6, that's what leads us to our 300. This one is just showing us where they got the 300. So they say that not that the planned inventory ending inventory is 0. They have 15 workers and each can produce 20 skateboard per period. So this is just some few information that they're giving us, and based on what we worked, we did all this calculation. So the second question is now saying refer to the same question after reviewing the plan provided in the preceding example. Planners have decided to develop an aggregate plan. They have learned that one person is about to retire from the company. Rather to replace the person, they would like to stay with a smaller workforce and use the overtime to make up the lost output. The regular time, the output is 280 per period, and then the maximum amount of overtime output per period is 40 unit. So they say that develop a plan and compare it to the previous one. So in short, what they mean is like before they were working normally and they were producing 280 unit with all those employees that they had. Remember, they said that they had 15 workers and they were producing something like 300 units per period. But now one of them is retired and the company does not want to hire someone else. So instead we will pay overtime, and the overtime that we are going to pay, we will pay them to workers that would like actually to match the demand. This is how we're going to use. So the only difference between this exercise and the previous one, the first thing is the regular output. The regular output in the first one was 300, while in the second is 2.8 to 80. And the difference also is like they are using overtime, while in the previous one they were not using overtime. So the first thing that you start with is the forecast, which is already given. This is the forecast that we have for 6th period, which is 200, and this forecast didn't change. So if we need to start solving on our table, we will start first with our forecast, and this is the forecast that we have from period 1 until period 6. We have 200, 300, 200, 300, and all these values are already given. For every exercise, you're always going to be given a forecast, and when you take this total, they'll give you 1.8. But now when you look at the problem is saying that the reduced regular time is 280, which means that the regular time now is not 300 anymore, but is 280. So what do? We go back to our exercise. I will go back to our table. The regular time now is 280 per period. So we have 280 for the second, 280 for the third, 280 for the fourth, until we reach the end of all our tables. But now the total that you get here is supposed to be the total of all the period from the first period to the last period. How many units did we produce? So it's 280 times 6, which will give you 1680. You find out now that the regular output and the forecast are not the same. The total of the forecast is 1.8, but the regular output is 16. It means that we forecasted to produce 1.8, but we only produce 1618. So what is going to happen is like that's why we need overtime, so that they will help us to get these values match. So what is going to happen is, where do we get the overtime? So for you to know in which period you will add the overtime, you need to look at the difference between the output and the forecast. So we don't go straight by filling the overtime. We start first by filling the output minus forecast. Those periods that will be negatives, that means we won't be able to match the inventory or to match the demand. That is only when we will need overtime. What does it mean? So in the first period, the customer wanted 200 units, but in our stock we could produce 280 units, which is good because we will give all the 200 and we will be left with 80 additional units. 280 minus 200. Second period, the same thing. We forecasted 200 to be sold, but we manufactured 280, so we still left with an additional 80 units. In the third period now, we forecasted to sell 300 units, but we only manufacture 280. That means it's more like we will have a deficit of 200, and in that case, of 20, and in that case it becomes a problem. So how do we do to match? That's what we need to work now over time, because what we wanted to produce and what we have produced do not match. So how much overtime should we use? When you look at the problem, they say that they've learned that 1% the maximum overtime, the maximum amount of overtime is 40 unit per period. That means every period that is deficit, we're gonna use an aggregate. We're gonna use an overtime of 40, which means we are on overtime here, and we're gonna go in that period that is deficit, which is period 3. We have an overtime of 40, which means that now we produce 200 and 280 units normally, but with the forecast, with the overtime, we want more people to work. They have produced an excessive 40 units, so we have 280 plus 40, which gives you 320. Now it means that it's more like in this period we have produced 320 and the customer wanted 300, so we'll be left with an additional stock of 20, because it's 280 plus 40, which is 320, minus 300, we have 20 rand. Same thing in the previous period. In the next period, in the next period, the customer wants 400 units. We can only produce 280. And in that case, we still need overtime. And the maximum overtime that we can use per period is 40. Then when you look at the total, we have 280 plus 40, which gives you 320. But then this 320 is still not enough, because the customer is requiring 400 unit, but we can only provide 320 even after using the overtime. We don't have a choice. We will have a deficit number of 80, but it is better to get a deficit number of 80 rather than to have a deficit of 120, because if we didn't use the overtime in this period, we would have used 120. It's more like it's better to owe someone 80 rand, rather than owing a person 120. It's still a debt, but at least this one is lower. So fifth period, the principle is the same. The customer wanted 500 units, but we only produced 280. So let's use again overtime. And because we're going to use overtime here, we will get 280 plus 40, which gives you 320. Then you have 320 minus 500, which will give you a negative value of 180, which means again that in this case we're still not able to fulfill the demand, because the demand was 500 and we only produced 320. Well, 280 plus 40 of the overtime, which gives us 320. Now in that case, we go back to period 6. Period 6, the customer wanted 200 units, but here we were only able to manage to produce 280 units. So in this case, we are fine, because we produce more than what the customer wanted and we don't need overtime anymore. So in this case, we just have a positive 80. So I want to get your attention again. Let me come back on this 3 period, why we used overtime in period 3, 4, 5, and we didn't use in the other period. So for you to know in which period we used overtime, you need to check the period where the regular time is lower than the forecast. If the regular time is above the forecast, that means the company can afford to produce that, because we still have excessive stock. But if we have a period whereby the forecast, the regular time is lower than the output, in that case you use an overtime. This is what is happening with period 3, 4, and 5. You find out that in this case the regular time is 280 while the demand is 300. So why did we use 40? Because this is what was said here, that the output per period was 40. I want to emphasize on the fact that here we are talking about per period. Per period, in this case, it means that for every period we cannot use an overtime that is greater or lower than 40. It must be 40 on the dot. Sometimes you can have exercises that will tell you, for example, that you can use a maximum overtime of 40 for the entire period under study. Here they are talking about per period, which means period 1, 2, 3, 4. If they say it for the entire period, it means that it's going to be from period 1 until period 6, which means that in this case we cannot use an overtime that exceeds 40. This will be that in the first period we have a total of 40, but we can't use all the 40. We will use only the number that is equal to what the customer asks. If the customer is asking for 300, here we have 280. Because we only have a maximum of 40, we will use 220 minus how many of the 40 we need so that it will match our forecast and our regular output. It will be 20. Then we are remaining again with 20 units. So those 20 units, we will use them in the next period and so on. But this is not the case. The case in this exercise, we are saying that the output period per period is 40. That means for every period where the regular is lower than the forecast, we're going to use a 40. This what happened. So last time I was telling you that when you look at the sum of all the values that are here, they must give you a 0, which means if we take 80 plus 80 plus 20, so if we take 80 plus 80 plus 20 minus 80, why are we minusing 80? Because the between bracket is a negative value. You don't write negative 80, you write between bracket 80. Then we have negative 180 again plus 80. You will find out that this total here is equal to 0. And this is right because the output minus the input, they must always be 0. Also, if you look at your overtime here, the sum is 40 plus 40 plus 40, which gives you 120. So if you take this 120 plus this overtime, you will get the 1.8 that is here. And in this case, we have matched actually the demand. We have matched what is required and we are sorted. So the next thing is we go back now to our inventory. The inventory, the company is saying that they are starting the inventory with 0 because remember we are still they say that refer to question 1, and question 1 is saying that not that the planning ending inventory is 0, but also they intend to start with a 0 inventory on end for the first period, which means that if we come back to our exercise here, it means that the beginning inventory is 0, which means on period 1 they didn't start with anything. They produced and they sold, but they were left with 80 more units. So it will be 80 what we started plus what we ended up with, which will still be 80, which means that in the first event they started with 0, but then they finished the day with 80, so they will end up with 80 in the inventory. This is period 1. So now we are moving from period 1 to period 2. Period 1 they ended up with 80. That means in the second period they will still start with 80. It's more like you close your shop on Monday at 5 p.m. you close it with 20 units in your inventory. When you come on Tuesday morning, you will still find the 220. That is what you're going to start the day with because it was the leftover from yesterday. This is also the same thing. The 80 that we have here is a leftover from the 80 that we have here, is a leftover from previous one, from period 1. But now this is what we are starting with. But during the course of the day after doing all our sales, we are left again with 80 units. So it's 80 that we are left with plus what we started with, which is going to be 160. The 160 that you have here is what you're going to end period 2 with, but it's still going to be a leftover from period 2. So the 160 that we ended up with in period 2, we're going to start with it in period 3. So you have 160 plus the 20 that you got again in the inventory toward the end of the day. So in period 3 we started with 160, but after everything we are left with 20 more units, which will be 180. Now if we take this 180 that we ended up in period 3, this 180 will still going to be the new inventory for period 4. But in period 4, remember that we have a between bracket 80, which means that this between bracket is a negative, which means that we still owe the customer. Remember, the customer asked 400 units. We could only produce 280 plus 40, which is 320. So we still owe the customer 80 units. And in that case, we still now have an excessive inventory of 180. So we will take 180 minus the 80 that we owe the customer. We will remain with 100 in our inventory. And the 100 that we remain with, we're going to start with again in period 5. So in period 5, we're going to start with 100 units. Now we have 100 units. We still owe the customer something like 180 units, but we have 100 units here. What is going to happen is we will give him all the 100, but it needs 180. We give him all the 100, our ending inventory is going to be 0. But then we will have a backlog because we still owe him 80 rand. Now the backlog here is going to be 80. Backlog are always negative, but you don't put them between bracket. You don't put them, you just leave them as long as they fall under backlog. What does a backlog means? It means the customer we owe the customer 180 unit, but we only have 100 in stock. So we give him the 100, we are left with 0, but we still owe him 80 rand again. And that 80 rand, we are putting it here. So in the next period, in period 6, our inventory in period 5 was 0. This is what we ended up with. Obviously, even when we start our inventory in period 6, it will still be 0. But then we produce 80 more units than expected in this period. Instead of us putting that 80 here, remember that in the previous period, we owe the customer 80, which will go in the backlog. So it means that this 80 is going to be given to this customer, and we will get a 0 here. So every time that you are working, you'll find out that the beginning and the ending inventory of the last period should be equal to 0 every time. So now in this case, I'm going to repeat myself again, mainly from period 4. From period 4, now from period 3. From period 3, we have a 160 that is coming from period 2. And this 160 here, we owe the customer, we produced an excessive 20 units plus the 160 that we already have, it will give us 180. This 180 in period 3 that we end up with, we're going to start with it in period 4, which will be 180. Now we have 180 units, but then in period 5, there's a deficit of 80 units because the customer wanted 400, we got 320, and we still owe him 80 rand, 80 unit. And this 80 unit minus the 180 that we have in our inventory, that means we'll remain with 100 units. This 100 units that we remain with, we take them, we're gonna start with them in period 5. And because we are starting with them in period 5, you look at period 5, the customer initially wanted 500 units. We could manufacture only 320 units, which is the summation of these two. That means we owe now the customer 180. But now we only have 100 for now, so we give him 100. Our inventory is going to be equal to 0. But as a backlog, we have a debt of 80 rand. So the backlog are never negative, never ever. You don't put a negative or you don't put a bracket because they are backlog already. So in this case, it means that we still owe the customer 80 unit. So, but we ended up our inventory with 0 because we owe him 100 and 80. We had 100 we gave him. We are remaining with this. So we start again period 6 with the 0 from period 5. But now we have an excess of 80 unit. And these 80 units, we're going to take them minus the backlog that we had here, which will give us a 0. Now, after calculating this, the next thing is to calculate the average. What is the average inventory? The average inventory is the average between the beginning and the ending. So you take 80 plus 0, beginning plus ending divided by 2, which will give you 80 divided by 2, which will give you 40. The next thing is we take 80 plus the 160 that we have, and we divide it by 2, which is going to give you 120. So we have 120 here. The next one, we take 160 plus 180 that we divide by 2, which will give you 170. The next, we take 180 plus 100, which gives you 280 divided by 2. You have a 140 here. It's just the average of the two values. Then we have 100 plus 0 divided by 2, which gives you 50. And then the other average is just equal to 0. Now, we are done with everything that is related to the number of units. Now we need to calculate the cost. As far as the costs are concerned, we take the information in the previous example. The previous example says that for every regular time, we need to give them a cost of 2 rand. Then we look at our cost here. We have the output where we leave this cell empty. We start with the regular. The regular says that initially the company manufactured 200 units per period. But the cost is like we need to pay 2 rand for every unit that is manufactured, which means that in the first period we have manufactured 280 units, but then the company says that it's 2 rand for every unit that is manufactured. So in total we are going to have 560 in the first period. 560, 560, 560 for the for the 5th period, and for the sixth period. Remember, now we still need to find the total of all. We take the 560 times 6, you will get a total of 3360. In this case, it means that we have paid these people for 560 for every period because they are producing 280 units times 2. The overtime, do we have any overtime that was used? Yes, we have overtime in period 3, 4, and 5. And we use 40 hours for each. Now, how much should we pay for the overtime? In this case, they are saying that for every overtime, we need to pay 3 rand. So, we look at number of units. In the third period, we produced 40 units times 3, it's 120, and we have 120 for period 3, 4, and 5. Then the next one is the subcontract. Do we have any subcontract that we used? No, it is empty. You can either leave it empty or you can just put some values here, like some X here, to show you that there's no value that we used here. So you can do the same thing here. We'll go back to the subcontract. We have nothing that was used. Then the inventory. The company is saying that for every inventory that we have used, the cost should be 1 rand for every unit. So we go back, how many units do we have here? As we for the inventory, we look at the average inventory. So in the first period, we have an average inventory of 40. 40 times 1 gives us 40. So it's 1 rand. That means it will be all the average inventory times 1, which will still give you the same value. So we have 140 here, we have 40, 50, then we have a 0, which means in this case, those are the information that we got. Then we look at the back orders. Do we have any the back orders are coming from the backlogs here. Do we have any backlog? Yes, which is 80 rand in period 5. Then we go back to our exercise. How much should we pay for back orders? It is 5 rand for every back order. So we go back here, we have 80. Where is it? We have 80 here times 5, which gives you 400 rand that we will pay. So now what we are going to do is, like, we'll take the total of every period and then we will see how much we get. So we get 560 plus 40, which will give us 600. Then we take 560 plus 120, which gives us 680. Then we have a 560 plus 120 plus 170, which gives us 850. Then we have 560 plus 120 plus 140, which gives us 820. Then we have 560 again plus 120 plus plus 50 plus 400, which gives us 1130. And then the last row is just 560. Now I want to emphasize on the fact that for every calculation that you are doing, you must have a total for the column and the rows. Like here we have 120 plus 120 plus 120, which will give us 360 here. This is going to be the total. Then for this period here, we will get 40 plus 120 plus 170 plus 140 plus 50, which should give us 520 here. So the 520 is the total of the values that are here. Then we do the same thing with this one. There's only one value, which is going to be 400. So now we need to find the total. Either we take these numbers, we add them, that will give us a total, or we take these numbers here, that will still give us a total. So when you take this total, this number, you add them, you'll get a total. They must be equal to the same values that you have here. So I'm going to start with the rows first. So I will take the 600 plus 680 plus 850 plus 820 plus 1130 plus 560. You get 4640. This is the total that we get here, 4640. Then I should do the same thing with the values that are here. You add them and you try to compare which one is better. So in this case, to try to compare if we still get the same answer. 3360 plus 360 plus 520 plus 400, which gives you the same value of 4640. What does it mean? The 4640 here means that if we use that policy, if we let that worker that we are talking about in this exercise, they're saying that one person left and we are supposed to use They say that after reviewing the plan developed, they've learned that one person is about to retire. Rather than replace the person, they would like to stay with a smaller group. So in this case here, in the first exercise, we had one person where the company working normally. Our total was 4,700. But now in the second part, one of the employees left, but yet we were supposed to work. We decreased our reduced time, and we also we increase on the overtime. Our total is not 400 and not 4,700. Our total now is 4,640. This is the final number that we got. So this number that we got here is lower than the 400 and 700. So you found out that using this policy is much better than the previous one because it's providing us with a proper with a lower cost. Remember our objective as operation managers, minimize cost and maximize profit. So as far as the cost that we got here is lower than the previous one, so using this method is actually better than using the previous one because it's just lower. So I think this is it about this video. We're just doing the second activity. We'll do one more video next time that will be about the third question, and we will be done with aggregate planning. So thank you so much for watching this video. Do not forget to subscribe to the page. I just hope that this video was really insightful. Thank you so much for your time, and